The year was 1847, and the desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun. Death had visited this place recently, leaving behind vultures and silence. But it was not death that made Ezekiel Thornfield stop his horse. It was the sight of a young woman sitting motionless against a withered oak tree, her head completely shaved bare, with the word "unwanted" carved into her scalp in what looked like charcoal. She sat so still that for a moment he thought she might be another victim of the unforgiving frontier. Then her eyes moved, meeting his with a gaze that held neither hope nor fear, only a terrible emptiness that chilled him more than any desert wind ever could. Ezekiel had been wandering the territories for 3 years now, ever since the fever took his wife and daughter back in Missouri. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, to the company of his faithful mare Delilah, and the endless conversations he held with ghosts. But this sight before him was different. This was a living soul marked for abandonment in the cruelest way imaginable. He dismounted slowly, his weathered boots hitting the hard-packed earth with soft thuds. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge his presence beyond that initial glance. She appeared to be around 21 years of age, though the harsh treatment she'd endured made it difficult to tell for certain. Her clothes were little more than rags, torn and stained with dust and what might have been blood. But it was her head that drew his attention, completely bald, with that awful word etched across her scalp in dark letters that stood out starkly against her pale skin. Miss Ezekiel called softly, removing his hat out of respect. His voice carried the gentle drawl of a man raised in the Missouri hills. "Miss, can you hear me?" She turned her head slightly, and he saw that her eyes were a startling shade of green, like spring grass after rain. There was intelligence there, and pain, but also something that might have been relief at seeing another human being who wasn't raising a hand against her. "I can hear you just fine, mister," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst but steady. "Though I'm surprised you stopped. Most folks would have ridden on by." Seeing what's written on my head, Ezekiel knelt down slowly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. Up close, he could see that the letters had been burned into her scalp, not written with charcoal as he'd first thought. The cruelty of it made his stomach turn. "What's your name, miss?" he asked gently. "Don't rightly matter anymore," she replied, looking away toward the horizon. "Name's something you give to people who want to know it. And as you can see, I ain't wanted by nobody." "Well, I'm a skin, ain't I?" Ezekiel said. "And I wouldn't be a skin if I didn't want to know." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was genuine or just another person who would hurt her. Finally, she spoke. "Magnolia," she said quietly. "Magnolia Blackwood. Though I suspect that won't mean nothin' to you." Ezekiel nodded respectfully. "It's a fine name. A strong name. I'm Ezekiel Thornfield, and I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Miss Blackwood." Despite everything, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Ain't nobody called me Miss Blackwood in a very long time." He reached for his canteen and held it out to her. "You look like you could use some water." Magnolia hesitated, then took the canteen with shaking hands. She drank deeply, water running down her chin and neck, and Ezekiel could see just how desperately thirsty she'd been. "Thank you," she whispered when she'd finished. "How long you been sittin' here?" he asked. 3 days, I think. Maybe 4. Time gets fuzzy when you're waiting to die. Who did this to you?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, his anger at whoever had branded this young woman like livestock coloring his tone. Magnolia's hand went instinctively to her head, fingers tracing the burned letters. "My own family," she said simply. "My pa and my brothers, they decided I was problematic. Said I brought shame on the family name." "What kind of shame could a young woman like you possibly bring?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "I can read, Mr. Thornfield. I can read and write and cipher numbers better than any of them. And I wasn't content to just sit quiet and tend house like a proper woman should. I asked questions. I spoke my mind. I wanted to learn things that women ain't supposed to learn." Ezekiel felt his jaw tighten. He'd known men like her father and brothers, men who saw a woman's intelligence as a threat rather than a gift. "So they marked you," he said. "They shaved my head while I slept, then heated up a brand they'd made special, held me down while they burned it into my scalp. Then they dragged me out here and left me to die." She spoke matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather, said if I was so smart, I could figure out how to survive on my own. The cruelty of it was beyond Ezekiel's understanding. He'd seen terrible things in his years on the frontier, but this seemed particularly evil, a family turning on one of their own with such calculated brutality. "Well," he said, standing and dusting off his knees, "I reckon they were right about one thing. You are smart, smart enough to find yourself some shade and conserve your strength until help arrived." "Help?" Magnolia looked up at him with those startling green eyes. "Mister, you don't understand. I'm marked now. Ain't no decent folk gonna want anything to do with me. I'm damaged goods." "Maybe so," Ezekiel said, extending his hand to her. "But you ain't dead yet, and that's what matters right now. Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." Magnolia stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. "Where could I possibly be safe? Look at me, Mr. Thornfield. I'm branded like a cow, cast out by my own blood. There ain't no place in this world for someone like me." "There's always a place," Ezekiel said firmly. "Might not be the place you expected, but there's always a place for folks who are willing to work for it." Slowly, hesitantly, Magnolia reached out and took his hand. Her grip was stronger than he'd expected, and when he helped her to her feet, she stood straight despite everything she'd endured. "I don't have nothin' to offer you," she said. "No money, no family connections, nothin'. Why would you help me?" Ezekiel looked at her for a moment, seeing not the branded woman that others would see, but the intelligent, determined person underneath. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I got a feeling you got more to offer than you think." He helped her onto Delilah's back, then swung up behind her. As they rode away from that desolate place, Magnolia spoke quietly. "Where are we going?" "There's a town called Redemption Ridge about 2 days' ride from here," Ezekiel said. "Got a woman there named Ida Hawthorne who runs a boarding house. She's got a good heart and doesn't ask too many questions about folks' past troubles. And you think she'll take me in, looking like this?" "I think Ida Hawthorne has seen enough of the world to know that a person's worth ain't written on there outside," Ezekiel replied. "Besides, hair grows back, and that mark on your head, well, it might hurt now, but someday it might just be a reminder of how strong you are." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the desert gradually giving way to scrubland and then to grassland. Ezekiel could feel Magnolia relaxing slightly behind him, though she remained alert and watchful. As the sun began to set on their first day of travel, they made camp near a small stream. Ezekiel built a fire while Magnolia sat nearby, still seeming uncertain about her place in this new reality. "Mr. Thornfield," she said as he prepared beans and hardtack for their supper, "can I ask you something?" "Course. Why are you really helping me? And don't give me that right thing to do answer. There's more to it than that." Ezekiel paused in his cooking, considering his words carefully. "You remind me of someone," he said finally. "My daughter, Rebecca. She was about your age when the fever took her. Smart as a whip, that girl. Always asking questions, always wanting to know more about the world than what was right in front of her. And that bothered you?" "Lord, no," Ezekiel said with a soft smile. "It delighted me. I encouraged it. My wife, God rest her soul, she used to worry that I was filling Rebecca's head with too many ideas, that it would make her dissatisfied with woman's usual lot in life. But I figured knowledge never hurt nobody, no matter who they were." Magnolia was quiet for a moment. What would have happened to her if she'd lived? I mean, would she have ended up like me eventually? "Not while I drew breath," Ezekiel said firmly. "Any man who tried to harm my daughter for being intelligent would have had to go through me first." "You're a good father," Magnolia said softly. "Was," Ezekiel corrected. "I was a good father. Now I'm just a wanderer trying to make sense of a world that took away everything that mattered to me." They ate their simple meal in companionable silence, and when Magnolia finally lay down to sleep wrapped in Ezekiel's spare blanket, he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders for the first time since he'd found her. The next day brought them to the outskirts of Redemption Ridge, a small but thriving town that had grown up around a silver mine. Ezekiel had been here before, and he knew the people well enough to predict their reactions to Magnolia's appearance. "Keep your head up," he advised as they rode down the main street. "Don't act ashamed of what was done to you. You got nothing to be ashamed of." Magnolia straightened her shoulders, and Ezekiel felt a surge of pride at her courage. People stopped and stared as they passed, whispers following in their wake. But Magnolia kept her gaze forward. Ida Hawthorne's boarding house was a 2-story building at the end of Main Street, painted white with blue shutters and a welcoming front porch. Ida herself was sitting on that porch when they arrived, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen more than their share of trouble. "Ezekiel Thornfield," she called out as they dismounted. "I was wondering when you'd pass through again." Her gaze shifted to Magnolia, taking in her appearance without judgment. "And who might this young lady be?" "Ida, I'd like you to meet Miss Magnolia Blackwood," Ezekiel said formally. "She's had some trouble and could use a safe place to stay for a while." Ida stood and walked down the porch steps, her movements graceful despite her age. "Miss Blackwood," she said with a slight curtsy, "you're welcome here." Magnolia looked surprised at the formal greeting. "Ma'am, I should tell you, I don't have money for room and board, and as you can see, I'm not exactly presentable." "Honey," Ida said gently, "I've been running this boarding house for 20 years. I've seen folks in every kind of condition you can imagine. As for payment, well, there's always work to be done around here for someone willing to do it." "What kind of work?" Magnolia asked suspiciously. "Can you read and write?" "Yes, ma'am." "Very well." Ida's face lit up. "Then you can help me with my books. I've been struggling with the accounts for months. My eyes ain't what they used to be, and numbers seem to swim around on the page these days." Magnolia looked uncertain. "You'd trust me with your business accounts?" "Someone like me." "Someone like what?" Ida asked sharply. "Someone who's intelligent and educated. Someone who's survived hardships that would break a lesser person." "Yes, Miss Blackwood. I'd trust someone like you." For the first time since Ezekiel had found her, Magnolia's eyes filled with tears. But these were different tears than the ones he'd expected to see. These were tears of relief and gratitude. "I'd be honored to help you, Mrs. Hawthorne," she said quietly. "It's Miss Hawthorne, dear. Never did find a man worth marrying. Now, let's get you settled in and see about getting you some proper clothes." As Ida led Magnolia into the boarding house, Ezekiel felt a sense of satisfaction settle over him. This was the right place for her. He was certain of it. Over the following weeks, Ezekiel stayed in town, ostensibly to rest Delilah and resupply, but really to make sure Magnolia was settling in well. What he witnessed amazed him. Despite her appearance, or perhaps because of it, Magnolia threw herself into her work with fierce determination. She didn't just help Ida with the books, she reorganized the entire accounting system, identifying inefficiencies and suggesting improvements. That saved the boarding house significant money. She also began teaching reading and writing to some of the local children whose parents worked in the mines and couldn't afford formal schooling. At first, people were skeptical about letting their children learn from a branded woman, but Magnolia's patience and skill soon won them over. "She's got a gift," Ida told Ezekiel one evening as they sat on the porch watching Magnolia work with a group of children in the front yard. "These young ones adore her, and she's teaching them things they never would have learned otherwise." Ezekiel nodded, watching as Magnolia patiently helped a young boy sound out words in a primer. Her hair had started to grow back, a soft brown fuzz that partially obscured the terrible branding, but she made no attempt to hide it completely. "She's found her place," he said. "What about you?" Ida asked. "You planning to wander on soon, or might you consider staying put for a while?" It was a question Ezekiel had been asking himself. For 3 years, he'd moved constantly, unable to settle anywhere because every place reminded him of what he'd lost. But watching Magnolia rebuild her life had stirred something in him, a sense that maybe it was possible to start over. "I've been thinking about it," he admitted. "We could use a good man around here," Ida said. "Someone with your skills and experience. The mine's been having some trouble with claim jumpers lately, and the sheriff's getting too old to handle it all himself." Before Ezekiel could respond, Magnolia approached the porch. The children had gone home for supper, and she looked tired, but content. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me. No need for thanks, he replied. You've made your own way here. Maybe so, but I never would have had the chance if you hadn't stopped for me that day. She paused, then added, Miss Hawthorne tells me you might be thinking about staying in town. The thought had crossed my mind. Magnolia smiled, and Ezekiel was struck by how much she'd changed since that first day. The hollow emptiness in her eyes had been replaced by purpose and determination. I hope you do, she said simply. This town could use more good people. That night, Ezekiel made his decision. He sought out Sheriff Tom Morrison, a grizzled man in his 60s who'd been keeping the peace in Redemption Ridge for almost 2 decades. I hear you might need some help, Ezekiel said without preamble. Morrison looked him up and down appraisingly. You offering, might be. What's the situation? Morrison launched into a detailed explanation of the problems they'd been having with claim jumpers and cattle rustlers. It was nothing Ezekiel hadn't dealt with before, and he found himself nodding along. Pay ain't much, Morrison warned. But it's steady work, and the town council provides housing. It's not about the money, Ezekiel said. I'm tired of wandering. Morrison studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. Welcome to Redemption Ridge, Deputy Thornfield. The months that followed were some of the most peaceful Ezekiel had known since before the fever. He settled into his role as deputy, helping Morrison keep order and protect the town's citizens. The work was satisfying in a way that wandering had never been. Magnolia continued to flourish as well. Her tutoring had grown into a full-fledged school, with parents from neighboring settlements sending their children to learn from her. She'd also begun writing letters for illiterate townspeople and keeping books for several local businesses. One evening in late spring, almost a year after Ezekiel had found her in the desert, Magnolia approached him as he made his evening rounds. Deputy Thornfield, she said with mock formality, might I have a word? Course, Miss Blackwood. What's on your mind? They walked together toward the edge of town, where wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the gathering dusk. I've been thinking about what you said that first day, Magnolia said. About my mark being a reminder of how strong I am. Ezekiel glanced at her. Her hair had grown out enough now that she could style it to partially cover the scarring, but she rarely bothered. You've proven that strength every day since, he said. I suppose I have. But lately, I've been wondering if maybe it's time to stop carrying that mark as the defining thing about me. What do you mean? Magnolia stopped walking and turned to face him. Dr. Peterson thinks he might be able to do something about the scarring. Not remove it completely, but make it less prominent. He says there are techniques he learned back east that might help, and you're considering it. I'm torn, she admitted. Part of me thinks I should keep it as a reminder of what I survived, but another part of me wants to move forward without carrying that particular burden. Ezekiel considered his words carefully. Seems to me that's a choice only you can make. But I will say this, whether you keep that mark or not, the strength it represents is part of who you are now. That won't change regardless of what's written on your skin. Magnolia smiled. You always know just what to say, don't you? Not always. But I've learned a thing or two about starting over. They resumed walking, and Magnolia was quiet for a while. Finally, she spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Shoot, do you ever think about your wife and daughter? I mean, do you still mourn them, or have you found peace? It was a question Ezekiel had been grappling with for months. I think about them every day, he said honestly. But the grief, it's different now, less sharp, more like a gentle ache than a constant pain. What changed? You did, he said simply. Watching you rebuild your life, seeing you turn something terrible into something beautiful, it reminded me that life goes on, that it's meant to go on. Magnolia stopped walking again, and when Ezekiel turned to look at her, he saw tears in her eyes. You saved my life, she said quietly. You saved mine right back, he replied. They stood there in the fading light, to people who had found in each other something they hadn't even known they were looking for. Not romance, their relationship had never moved in that direction, but something deeper. Family, purpose, home. So what will you decide? Ezekiel asked. About the treatment. Magnolia touched her head thoughtfully. I think I'm ready to let go of some of the anger. Not all of it. I earned that anger, and it served me well, but enough to Make room for other things, such as hope, she said simply. Hope for what comes next. 2 weeks later, Dr. Peterson performed the procedure. It was painful and took several hours. But when it was over, the scarring was significantly less visible. The word unwanted was still there, but faded enough that it no longer dominated Magnolia's appearance. As she looked at herself in the mirror for the first time afterward, Ezekiel stood behind her. "How do you feel?" he asked. Magnolia studied her reflection for a long moment. "Like myself," she said finally, for the first time in a very long time. "I feel like myself." Summer arrived with a celebration as the town prepared for its annual Founders' Day festival. Magnolia had been asked to organize the children's events, while Ezekiel helped with security arrangements. As they worked together preparing for the festivities, Ezekiel realized how completely their lives had become intertwined with this community and with each other on the day of the festival. As he watched Magnolia leading a group of children in games and educational activities, he felt a profound sense of contentment. This was what life was supposed to be, not just surviving, but thriving, not just existing, but contributing something meaningful to the world. "You do make quite a team," Ida observed, joining him as he watched the festivities. "We do, don't we?" Ezekiel said with a smile. "Any chance that partnership might become more permanent?" Ezekiel chuckled. "Ida Hawthorne, are you trying to play matchmaker?" "Maybe a little," she admitted with a grin. "You're both good people who deserve happiness, and anyone with eyes can see you care about each other." "We do care about each other," Ezekiel agreed, "but not in the way you're thinking. What we have is different. Better, maybe. We're family now, her and I, the kind of family you choose, not the kind you're born into." Ida nodded thoughtfully. "That might be the best kind of all." As the sun set on the festival, casting long shadows across the town square, Ezekiel found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he'd been a broken man wandering aimlessly through the desert. Now he had purpose, community, and something resembling peace. Magnolia approached as he was packing up the security equipment. "Successful day," she said, brushing dust from her skirts. "That it was. Those children of yours put on quite a show." "They're not my children," Magnolia corrected with a smile, "but I'm honored to be part of their lives." They walked home together through the quiet streets, comfortable in the silence that had become natural between them. "Ezekiel," Magnolia said as they reached Ida's boarding house, "I want you to know that what you did for me that day in the desert, it wasn't just about saving my life. You saved who I was, who I could become. You did the same for me." He replied, "I was lost when I found you. Didn't even know it at the time, but I was. And now?" Ezekiel looked around at the town that had become their home, at the people who had become their family, at the woman who had reminded him that life was worth living. "Now I'm found," he said simply. As they parted ways for the evening, Magnolia to her room at the boarding house, Ezekiel to his small house behind the sheriff's office, both carried with them the satisfaction of lives rebuilt from the ashes of tragedy. The word unwanted still existed on Magnolia's scalp, faded but present, but it no longer defined her. She had redefined herself through her own choices, her own actions, her own determination to be more than what had been done to her. And Ezekiel had learned that sometimes the greatest act of faith is not in finding someone to save you, but in believing that you still have something worth saving in yourself. The desert that had nearly claimed Magnolia's life had also been the place where the broken souls found each other and discovered that healing was possible. Not the kind of healing that erases scars, but the kind that transforms them into symbols of strength. In the end, they had both learned the same lesson, that being unwanted by some people only mattered if you let it. The real measure of worth came from the lives you touched, the good you did in the world, and the family you chose to build around yourself. As the seasons turned and years passed, their story became part of Redemption Ridge's folklore. The deputy who'd given up wandering for purpose, and the teacher who'd turned her greatest shame into her greatest strength. To people who had found in each other not romance, but something perhaps more lasting, the recognition that everyone deserves a chance to start over, and that sometimes the most unlikely saviors are the ones who need saving themselves. Magnolia never did have the remaining scar completely removed. She said it reminded her not of what had been done to her, but of what she had overcome. And every day, as she taught children to read and helped adults navigate the complexities of a changing world, she proved that the cruelest labels people place on us have power only if we accept them as truth. The wanderer had stopped wandering. The unwanted woman had found her place, and in a small town called Redemption Ridge, two broken people had discovered that healing was not just possible, it was inevitable. As long as you had someone to believe in you and the courage to believe in yourself. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.